A flight attendant disdainfully and blatantly relocated a black billionaire family to the back of the first-class cabin, believing she was asserting her authority. However, when the plane landed, a shocking truth was revealed. They were the owners of the airline. What happened next would make her confront the biggest mistake of her life. Sarah Collins, 30 years old, walked confidently through Skylux Airlines' first-class cabin. Promoted to first-class flight attendant 2 years ago, she viewed it as recognition of her hard work and talent. Each flight was an opportunity to prove she belonged among the elite, not just as a server, but as part of the luxurious experience. Clad in her crisply ironed uniform, her hair neatly tied back and a professional smile firmly in place, Sarah always embodied perfection, just as the airline demanded. On this evening, Flight 512 from New York to Paris was ready for takeoff. The first-class passenger list included a renowned investor, an Oscar-winning director, and several powerful business people. Sarah reviewed her tablet meticulously, ensuring every detail was perfect. First-class service wasn't just a job, it was an art she had honed over years. As the boarding door opened, Sarah greeted each passenger with a polished smile. The designer suits, expensive watches, and luxury handbags exuded wealth and status, making it easy to recognize who belonged. But when a family of 4 walked in, Sarah's brow slightly furrowed. The man, Michael Williams, wore a simple navy suit, understated and unremarkable. The woman, Vanessa, was dressed in an elegant cream-colored dress, radiating both confidence and warmth. Their 2 children, a boy around 7 and a girl about 5, stood quietly. The family exuded a calm and quiet demeanor, markedly different from the ostentatious displays of affluence Sarah was accustomed to. When Sarah checked their tickets, first-class seats 1A and 1B, an uncomfortable feeling arose. They didn't fit the image of typical first-class passengers. No gold watches, no designer bags, nothing ostentatious. She questioned how they had come to occupy these premium seats. A system error? An upgrade? With a reflexive smile, Sarah held the tickets longer than necessary. "Excuse me, I need to double-check your ticket information," she said, her voice polite but lacking warmth. Michael handed her the tickets calmly. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice even, as if sensing the subtle tension. "No, just a routine check," Sarah replied before turning away. Vanessa placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder, and their silent exchange stopped him from pursuing the matter further. Sarah headed to the service desk, where her colleague Megan was stationed. She leaned in and whispered, "That family? They don't really look like first-class passengers. Do you think their tickets were upgraded?" Megan frowned but checked the system. "No, their tickets are valid. They booked well in advance and paid in full. Is there a problem?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "No, it's just... they don't seem like the usual first-class type," she muttered, before heading back to the cabin. Part of her felt embarrassed for asking, but another part couldn't shake the unease. Returning to the family, Sarah forced a polite smile. "Follow me, please," she said. Instead of seating them in the prime first-class area with the best views, she directed them to the last row near the restroom. Though technically first class, these seats were far less desirable. Michael and Vanessa complied without complaint. Vanessa gently helped her daughter buckle in, while Michael placed their luggage in the overhead compartment silently. Their composure remained intact, but there was an unspoken awareness between them of what had just transpired. beside his wife. Not a word of protest, not a look of reproach. They simply watched as Sarah walked away. The silence felt like an unspoken reprimand, but Sarah chose to ignore it. She reassured herself she was doing the right thing. Maybe they had found some way to sneak into first class. First class wasn't a place for misplaced generosity. As Sarah returned to the service area to prepare for the next wave of passengers, she was unaware her actions had been observed by keen, discerning eyes. Robert Sterling, seated a few rows ahead, frowned as he watched her behavior. To Robert, Sarah's lack of warmth wasn't just a mistake. It revealed something deeper. The plane prepared for takeoff, and for Sarah, this was supposed to be just another routine flight. However, it would turn out to be a flight that changed her life forever. As the plane trembled slightly and ascended, the lights in the first-class cabin dimmed, creating an ambiance of quiet luxury. Sarah moved down the roads, greeting passengers and serving drinks, but her attention kept drifting toward the back of the cabin where the Williams family sat. Michael was engrossed in a book. Vanessa helped their daughter with a coloring book, and their son quietly played on a tablet. They weren't doing anything out of the ordinary, but their composed silence inexplicably held Sarah's focus. She justified her unease by telling herself she needed to keep an eye on them to ensure they didn't cause any trouble. Yet deep down, she knew they hadn't done anything wrong. The source of her discomfort gnawed at her, unspoken and unresolved. "Sarah, the table over there needs more wine," Megan, her co-worker, called out, breaking Sarah's thoughts. Realizing she had been standing absent-mindedly, Sarah snapped back to her duties, masking her embarrassment. She brought a glass of wine to an elderly passenger seated at the front, but found her gaze drifting once again to the Williams family. They remained calm, their quiet presence now unsettling her more than before. As time passed, Sarah's unease transformed into irritation. Why were they here? Why weren't they complaining? Why did they seem so calm? These questions swirled in her mind. Their composure felt to Sarah like a silent defiance, a challenge to her authority in the cabin. When dinner service began, Sarah and Megan prepared the meals, gourmet dishes like grilled salmon and Wagyu beef. By instinct, Sarah prioritized the passengers seated near the front, adhering to the unspoken rule that those in the center rows were the most important. The Williams family's row was served last. When Sarah finally brought their meals, Michael glanced up briefly before lifting his tray and setting it down without a word. Vanessa offered Sarah a polite smile, but to Sarah it felt sharp and cutting. They hadn't complained or shown any attitude, yet their silence seemed to pass judgment on her. Returning to the galley, Sarah met Megan, who regarded her with mild curiosity. "What's up with you? You've been staring at that family all flight." Megan asked. "Don't you think they're odd?" Sarah whispered, trying to mask her growing irritation. "They don't seem like first-class passengers at all. I think they must have found a way to get upgraded." Megan frowned. "Their tickets are valid. Why are you so fixated on this?" "It's just a feeling," Sarah muttered, glancing back toward the family. "I've seen plenty of people cheat their way into this cabin before. I just want to make sure everything's fine." Megan sighed, shaking her head. "Maybe you should focus on your job instead of your hunches." Sarah said nothing. Deep down, she knew Megan was right, but she couldn't shake the discomfort building inside her. It was as though the Williams family's presence had disrupted the balance of a space she had worked so hard to master and control. Later, when Michael pressed the Michael pressed the call button to request water for his daughter. Sarah, deliberately avoiding the interaction, let Megan respond instead. She lingered in the galley, wrestling with her thoughts. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just doing my job," she told herself, but passengers noticed more than she expected. Near the front of the cabin, Robert Sterling had been quietly observing Sarah's behavior since boarding. As she passed his seat, Robert raised his hand, catching her attention. Reluctantly, she stopped, summoning a professional smile. "Sir, how can I assist you?" she asked, her tone light but guarded. Robert fixed her with a sharp gaze. "You seem very busy, but I couldn't help noticing the family at the back received their meals quite late. Is there a reason for that?" Sarah froze momentarily, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Oh, we're just serving according to procedure," she replied, striving to sound composed. "It's nothing intentional. They were simply at the end of the list." Robert's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes remained fixed on hers. "Is that so? I thought first class was a place where all passengers were treated equally, or am I mistaken?" A wave of embarrassment swept over Sarah, but she resisted the urge to argue. "Thank you for your feedback, sir. I'll take it into consideration," she said quickly, eager to escape the conversation. As she walked away, Robert's words echoed in her mind. A place where all passengers are treated equally. Or am I mistaken? For the first time, Sarah felt her confidence waver. Elsewhere, Michael sat quietly by the window, occasionally glancing towards Sarah. He said nothing, but his silent observation only deepened her discomfort. The flight dragged on, each hour feeling heavier for Sarah as she battled an internal storm of self-assurance and growing doubt. She felt the weight of not only the watchful passengers, but also an inner turmoil she couldn't explain. The Williams family remained calm and composed, seated quietly at the back of the cabin. They showed no signs of dissatisfaction, yet their unshakable poise unsettled Sarah more than complaints ever could. To her, their silence felt like a subtle indictment. Meanwhile, Robert Sterling continued his quiet observations, noting every glance Sarah cast toward the family. He noticed not only how she delayed their service, but also her reluctance to engage with them. When the moment felt right, he lightly tapped his wineglass, summoning her again. "Sir, is there anything I can assist you with?" Sarah asked, striving to keep her composure intact. Robert leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but pointed. "How long have you been working in first class?" Caught off guard, Sarah hesitated before answering. "About 2 years, sir," she said, a hint of unease slipping into her tone. "Then you must know this cabin isn't just for people who look the part, correct?" His words landed heavily, and for a moment Sarah felt exposed, as if her carefully constructed facade had been stripped away. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly. "I noticed that the family in the last row received their food and drink significantly later than everyone else," Robert said evenly, his gaze unrelenting. "That doesn't align with the standard of service Skylux prides itself on." Sarah forced another smile, though it felt brittle. "We serve based on the order in the manifest, sir. There's nothing personal about it." Robert leaned back, his expression unreadable, but with a faint, knowing smile on his lips. The order in the manifest were, perhaps, your feelings about who belongs. A tightness gripped Sarah's chest, and she couldn't immediately respond. Robert's words had struck a nerve she was desperately trying to suppress. "Thank you for your feedback," Sarah said quickly, cutting the conversation short. She turned and walked away, but she could still feel Robert's gaze burning into her back. As Sarah tried to carry on with her duties, a subtle shift rippled through the cabin. Other passengers began to notice the disparity in how she treated the Williams family. Glances shifted from the family to Sarah, their silent curiosity sharpening the tension in the air. Though no one spoke up, the unease was palpable. At the back of the cabin, Michael Williams quietly observed. Vanessa, seated beside him, gently placed her hand on his, a gesture of reassurance. "Let her reveal herself," Vanessa whispered, her tone calm but rich with intent. Michael gave her a slight nod, his gaze remaining fixed ahead. For him, patience wasn't just a virtue, it was his greatest strength. He understood that Sarah's actions would eventually speak for themselves. In the small galley, Sarah retreated to compose herself. Megan was arranging coffee cups when she turned to Sarah with a concerned look. "Are you okay? I've noticed you've been focusing on that family all flight." Sarah picked up a tray, avoiding Megan's gaze. "I'm fine. I just think there's something off about them." "Off?" Megan raised an eyebrow. "You mean because they don't look like the other passengers?" "Not exactly," Sarah replied, her voice trailing off. "I just feel like they don't fit in this cabin." Megan stared at her, disappointment flickering across her face. "Sarah, I think you're letting your feelings cloud your judgment. They have valid tickets. They've done nothing wrong. So why are you treating them differently?" Sarah didn't respond. Megan's words stung, leaving her unsettled. "I'm not wrong," Sarah told herself. "I'm just doing my job." But deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely true. The weight of the flight pressed on her, every small detail, the sharpness of Robert's remarks, the Williams family's calmness, Megan's quiet reproach, seemed to conspire against her, pushing her closer to a confrontation she wasn't ready to face. Up at the front of the cabin, Robert set down his wine glass and stood. He walked slowly toward the back, where the Williams family was seated. Sarah's eyes followed him, her heart pounding. What is he going to do? She wondered, dread tightening her chest. Robert stopped beside Michael and leaned down to speak to him. Michael looked up, nodded slightly, and smiled. Their exchange was brief and inaudible to others, but when Robert returned to his seat, there was a satisfied look on his face, as though a critical decision had been made. Sarah felt as though she were walking a tightrope, each step threatening to send her plummeting. Yet instead of recalibrating, she doubled down, continuing to evade the inevitable. She didn't realize how closely her every move was being scrutinized, not just by the Williams family, but by other passengers as well, and none of them seemed pleased. As the flight settled into a steady rhythm, Sarah's turmoil only grew. The sharpness of Robert's earlier words, the Williams family's unsettling calm, and the heavy silence of the cabin all pressed against her. She tried to reassure herself. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm following my instincts." But no matter how much she justified her actions, doubt began to creep into her thoughts. Meanwhile, at the back of the cabin, Michael Williams exchanged a quiet word with Vanessa before standing. He made his way toward the front of the plane with an air of calm purpose. Sarah caught sight of him as he passed by and immediately felt her chest tighten. "Huh? What is he up to?" she wondered, her mind racing. She tried to focus on her work, but her eyes couldn't help but follow him. Everything that needed to be said. "Effective immediately. You'll be placed on administrative leave while we review this matter further," he continued, his tone firm but devoid of malice. Sarah's heart sank. "I understand, Captain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt a mix of humiliation, regret, and fear swirling within her, but she knew there was nothing she could say to change the situation. "Captain," Harris leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Take this time to reflect on your actions, Sarah. This isn't just about a single flight. It's about what it means to represent this airline and the values we stand for. If you can't uphold those values, there won't be a place for you here." Sarah nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I'll do better," she murmured, though the words felt hollow in the heavy silence of the cockpit. Captain Harris dismissed her with a simple nod, and Sarah left the cockpit, her steps unsteady. As she walked through the now empty cabin, the once familiar space felt alien and foreboding. She paused at the row where the Williams family had been seated, the memories of their calm composure and pointed words replaying in her mind. Her instincts had betrayed her, leading her down a path she hadn't fully understood until it was too late. Now, standing in the aftermath of her choices, Sarah felt the weight of the lesson pressing down on her. She had been so certain of her perceptions, so convinced of her role, yet it had all unraveled in the face of truths she hadn't been willing to see. The plane's exit loomed ahead, and with a deep breath, Sarah stepped out into the terminal. The noise of the bustling airport greeted her, but inside, her world was painfully quiet. Sarah's tears began to fall, and she quickly wiped them away, struggling to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't realize how deeply my actions could hurt someone. I was wrong." Michael's gaze softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "Acknowledging your mistake is a start, but an apology doesn't erase the experience. It doesn't change the fact that you judged us unfairly and treated us differently. This is about more than one flight. It's about a mindset that needs to change." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice steady but pointed. "Sarah, people like us often have to prove we belong in spaces where others assume we don't. And that burden is exhausting. For you to carry out those assumptions in your role, a role that demands impartiality and respect, only reinforces the barriers we're constantly trying to dismantle." "I understand," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Michael exchanged a glance with Vanessa before speaking again. "What happens next isn't entirely up to us, Sarah. Skylux has standards, and how they address this situation will reflect those standards. But as far as we're concerned, the best way to make this right is for you to truly reflect on why this happened and commit to changing." Vanessa added, her tone softening slightly. "We don't want this to ruin your career, but we hope it becomes a defining moment, a lesson you carry forward. If nothing changes, then this apology is meaningless." Sarah nodded, the weight of their words sinking in. "Thank you for giving me the chance to hear this directly from you," she said. "I'll do everything I can to be better." Michael stood, extending his hand to Sarah. She hesitated for a moment before taking it, feeling a mixture of relief and shame. "Good luck, Sarah," he said simply. Vanessa offered a polite nod as she and Michael turned to leave the room. Sarah sat in the silence that followed, her emotions a tangled mess of regret and determination. Their words echoed in her mind, leaving her with no illusions about the gravity of her actions and the work she needed to do to move forward. Do is take responsibility, not just in words, but in action. You can't undo what happened, but you can learn from it, and that starts with truly understanding why you acted the way you did. Sarah leaned back against her couch, clutching the phone tightly. I know I messed up, but I don't know where to start. How do I even fix something like this? Lauren's tone softened slightly, but her words carried weight. It's not about fixing it. It's about growing from it. You need to confront your biases head on. That means educating yourself, listening to others, and being open to change, even when it's uncomfortable. It's a process, Sarah. It's not easy, but it's necessary. I don't even know where to begin, Sarah admitted. You begin by listening and learning, Lauren replied. I'll send you some resources, books, articles, even some workshops. But more importantly, you need to reflect on why you reacted the way you did. This isn't just about losing your job, it's about who you are and who you want to be. Sarah nodded to herself, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the turmoil. Thank you, Lauren. I should have come to you sooner. I didn't think I'd ever need to. Lauren let out a small sigh, her voice gentle. It's okay, Sarah. What matters is that you're reaching out now. This can be a turning point for you if you let it. When the call ended, Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment, her mind buzzing with everything Lauren had said. The days ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since the flight, she felt as though she had a direction. The next morning, Sarah opened her laptop and began exploring the resources Lauren had sent her. As she read through personal stories of bias and exclusion, watched videos on diversity and equity, and took notes on how to challenge her own assumptions, she felt a growing awareness of how her actions fit into a much larger issue. She also reached out to Skylux's Human Resources Department, asking if she could participate in any diversity and inclusion training sessions during her suspension. She wasn't sure if it would make a difference, but it felt like a small step toward showing she was serious about change. Weeks later, Sarah found herself in a conference room at Skylux's headquarters, seated alongside other employees for a mandatory workshop on unconscious bias. Though she felt uncomfortable and exposed, she forced herself to engage fully, sharing her own story when prompted and listening intently to the experiences of others. By the end of the session, Sarah realized how much she had to learn, but also how much she was capable of changing. She left the workshop feeling humbled, determined, and cautiously hopeful. Her suspension eventually ended, and Sarah was reinstated, though with a formal warning in her file. When she returned to work, she approached her role with a newfound sense of purpose. Each interaction became an opportunity to rebuild trust, not only with her passengers, but with herself. Though the memory of that flight still haunted her, Sarah knew it had become a pivotal moment in her life. It wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of a journey toward becoming the person she truly wanted to be. People deeply. Each time she shared her journey, Sarah felt a mix of vulnerability and empowerment. Her honesty opened the door for others to reflect on their own biases and to discuss experiences they had kept hidden for years. Her story eventually caught the attention of Skylux Airlines. The company, under the leadership of the Williams family, had launched a new initiative focused on inclusivity and diversity training for its employees. Sarah was invited to participate as both a contributor and a participant, a rare chance to turn her mistake into a meaningful opportunity for change. When she entered the training room for the first session, Sarah felt a rush of emotions. She was no longer the person she had been on that fateful flight, but being back in a professional environment reminded her of what she had lost. Despite her nerves, she spoke candidly about her journey, addressing a room filled with colleagues and strangers alike. "This isn't an easy story for me to share," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I made a mistake, one that hurt others and revealed something about myself I didn't want to face. But I've learned that mistakes don't define you, unless you let them. What defines you is what you do after." Her words were met with silence at first, followed by a wave of applause. Several attendees approached her afterward, sharing their own struggles and thanking her for her bravery. Sarah realized that her vulnerability was creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to look inward and commit to change. Months later, Sarah was formally reinstated at Skylux Airlines, though not in the same role. The company offered her a position in their corporate training department, where she could continue to contribute to the inclusivity initiative. It was a chance to merge her professional expertise with her personal growth, a role that felt both challenging and redemptive. Sarah's work extended beyond the company. She began collaborating with other organizations, sharing her insights and helping to design training programs that addressed unconscious bias and promoted empathy in the workplace. Each new project was a reminder of how far she had come and how much further she could still go. Though Sarah occasionally reflected on the mistakes she had made, those memories no longer filled her with shame. Instead, they served as a reminder of the strength it took to confront her flaws and rebuild herself. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative, shaping her into someone she could be proud of. In time, Sarah came to see her past not as a burden but as a catalyst, a starting point for a life defined not by perfection but by growth, accountability, and the commitment to always do better. Sarah knew the journey wasn't over, but standing there, she felt at peace. It wasn't a peace born from perfection or from achieving any external recognition. It was the peace of someone who had learned to confront their mistakes, accept their flaws, and transform them into opportunities for growth. She had done the hard work of changing, not just her actions, but the way she saw the world. Sarah now viewed people through a lens of fairness, empathy, and respect, rather than through biases that once defined her behavior. Her story was one of redemption, but also one of hope, a reminder that even the most painful mistakes could lead to personal transformation, and that anyone, at any time, could choose to change for the better. In the years that followed, Sarah continued her work in diversity and inclusion, not just as a consultant or speaker, but as someone who lived out the values she now preached. Her commitment to continuous learning, her dedication to ensuring others did not face the same hurt she had caused, made her a driving force for positive change in the corporate world. As she moved forward, Sarah knew that the road ahead was long and often difficult. But every step, every lesson, and every moment of self-reflection brought her closer to the person she had always hoped to become. She had learned that it wasn't the mistakes we make that define us, but how we respond to them, and that the journey of growth never truly ends. And with that realization, Sarah felt, at last, the confidence of someone who had found peace, both within herself and with the world around her.